All right, so we're going into the modern theories of leadership now from the old theories and history of leadership. So, from those old theories that talked about, the trait approach, the behavioral approach, contingency approach, there was a bit of a shift. So, after these approaches that I mentioned, um, leadership theories have proposed two different major categories of leadership. First is traditional theories of leadership, which is based on all of those old ones. And then the next one is relational leadership approaches. So these traditional theories include the following: charismatic leadership, transformational leadership, authentic leadership, ethical leadership, servant leadership. And these are just all the types of leadership that we focus on largely in IO. And there's more than this, and some of it will be listed within these other ones, but these are the main ones that we are interested in research and that have positive outcomes. Next is the relational leadership approach. There's only one, and it's really popular these days. It's called leader-member exchange theory. So as you can guess from the name, the leaders and the members have some kind of interchanging relationship. They interact with each other. And this is the only one that really focuses on these interactions and how, excuse me, how followers play a role in the relationship. I don't even, I'm sorry if these recordings are very, what's the word? They're not polished. I just don't really have the energy to edit videos a lot, so you get what you get. And that probably wasn't the right attitude, but okay. So we're gonna go through these different theories and talk through them one by one. And I think that, I will spend most of the time here on transformational leadership, but these others are worth knowing as well. I don't know why this GIF is freaking out, and I apologize for that. So try not to get, let me just, yeah, I don't know what's happening here. Anyways, so traditional leadership theories, I'm gonna actually, really quick because this is bothering me. I was not doing this before. Let's go, just do this. So traditional leadership theories here, basically they are just saying that leaders are going to have some type of style or approach that they take to leadership. And all of those ones that I listed were different styles or approaches that can be taken by the leader. And many of the original great man woman theories that I talked about identified charisma as an important trait. And charisma is defined as a leader attribute that hypnotizes its followers and compels them to identify with and attempt to emulate the leader. So this was one of the first modern theories of leadership, was the charismatic leadership, because it was so overwhelmingly noted among popular, well-known leaders. And kind of like I mentioned in the previous lecture about height being an important predictor of who wins a presidential election in the United States, the other factor that was found in that same study was charisma. And I included the Tony Stark gif there that messed up because he's a very charismatic character. So let me get back into this because I'd rather now not look at that, but I will, now that we're past that gif, I will pull it back up. So charismatic leadership theory. Oh, and by the way, just as an aside, sometimes, so I build all my slides on Google Slides, and sometimes when I download them to show you guys, things like that happen. So I do apologize if there's issues like that in any of the other slides as well. But anyways, so going into charismatic leadership theory, so basically it says that in a crisis, followers perceive charismatic characteristics in an individual and accept that person as a leader, and that certain leadership behaviors can tend to contribute to a charismatic aura. So it's not entirely a function of the individual. Sometimes there's other factors that make people perceive someone as more charismatic. Um, and people often blindly follow charismatic leaders, even if what they're saying is not great or, you know, they're going down a bad path. It's just that charisma and that passion that makes people follow them. And that, the perfect example, of course, is Hitler being this apparently incredible speaker, and he had so much passion and charisma, and people just blindly lined up to follow him because of it. And they often, so even though this is a popular theory of leadership, it's often seen as kind of a negative thing because it's because of this blind following of charismatic leaders and how extreme leaders, such as that example Hitler, who are extremely charismatic leaders, they will often work hard to keep their followers blind and weak and in the dark. So they want to maintain their power, and they do this by using their charisma to manipulate and abuse their power and just control people with whatever charismatic speech, fear, whatever they have to do. So that's definitely a concern when it comes to leadership. However, even though charismatic traits tend to emerge as common among world leaders, whether good or bad, to be an effective leader, there's more than just charisma. Charisma really mostly helps leader emergence, and it makes people want to follow you more, so it can help with your leadership working, but we want more than just being charismatic. And that's where we get into transformational leadership theory. So if you're going to remember any of the theories of leadership, this is one of the ones that you should remember because it's the one that we probably use the most in modern IO psychology, and it has the most relationships with positive outcomes. And transformational leadership theory proposes that effective leaders transform their followers by helping them achieve their full potential. And this is often contrasted with transactional leadership, which is one of the ones that I didn't list in that first slide where I had a list of them, but it is cited often and it's often compared again with transformational leadership because transactional leadership is a style of leadership where leaders focus entirely on the extent in which subordinates meet task performance expectations. And to put it more simply and in a way that you can hopefully remember it, transactional leadership sees the leader-follower relationship as a transaction. So kind of like social exchange, you expect the workers to work because they're getting paid kind of thing. So it doesn't really focus on anything, building them up. It doesn't give them any inspiration. It's just they need to meet their expectations, and if they meet their expectations, everything will be good. It's just a transaction. Transformational leadership, although it may include some transactional factors, it's mainly comprised of 4 other components. Now I'm going to go through them one by one. And I'm including these gifts of Captain America because I think he exemplifies transformational leadership. So here are the 4 components, ready? And I don't expect you to have these memorized. They will likely be in a quiz, but you are more than welcome to look back at these slides during the quiz since it's online. Just remember that there is a time limit, so be, kind of familiar with it before you go into it. So the 4 components are first, idealized influence, which is the extent to which leaders conduct themselves as role models for their subordinates. So they are someone that they look up to. It goes back to that referent power from the very beginning of the lecture. Someone that is looked up to and a model of good behavior. And this one actually exhibits the greatest overlap with charismatic leadership, even though charisma isn't inherently good, people do tend to look up to and role model charismatic leaders. And it can be good. It's not always a Hitler type character, but it's something that could go either way. But if you're transformational leadership and you have all 4 of the factors, you're not going to be a bad leader. You're going to be a good leader. That's what all the research says. So the second one is inspirational motivation, which is leaders setting challenging goals. Remember that goal setting theory for motivation and using optimism and enthusiasm to encourage their subordinates. Third is intellectual stimulation. Leaders challenge subordinates to think critically and to support their own opinions, assumptions, and beliefs. And then fourth is individualized consideration, where leaders treat subordinates as individuals by attending to individual needs, strengths, abilities, aspirations, um, and through a variety of means. So, going through these one by one again, the first one is being a role model. The second one is motivating. The third one is stimulating their intellect, making them think. And the fourth is being considerate and caring for your followers. So a leader who does all four of these behaviors, all the research says they're a transformational leader and they are the most effective type of leader. And this is actually the one that I was talking about back in the previous video when I was discussing gender differences in leadership. So this technically has nothing to do with gender, except that there is some evidence that men are more likely to engage in that transactional leadership that I described, and women are more inclined to lean towards this transformational leadership. And since transformational leadership is more effective than transactional leadership, one could argue that there is some evidence that right now, the way things are, women are maybe a good option for being better leaders. However, I'm not saying that because it isn't actually about being a man or being a woman. It's about the behaviors they engage in and the way they approach leadership. And I think that the reason that there's these differences between men and women in their favoring for certain leadership styles goes back to those roles that we try to fit. And transformational leadership is pretty relational and it's pretty, I don't want to say touchy-feely, but it's definitely more of that, communal, relational, being a supporter rather than just trying to be that leader who's in charge of everything. And because we're trying to fit into roles that we have seen modeled for us, these behaviors maybe are more fitting for what women perceive themselves to be, and men sometimes get stuck in that box of needing to be tough and strong and in charge and maybe less inclined to engage in these behaviors. But anyone, if you train them properly, can be a transformational leader. And there's tons of evidence that people of all races and genders engage in transformational leadership and see the same positive results of it. So while, there might be some evidence that just based on our natural inclinations, from what is modeled for us in our roles and behaviors in society, transformational leadership is probably something that is more appealing to women at first glance than it is to men. However, this is just a style that anyone can take, and it is the most effective type of leadership. So I definitely encourage you, again, as I said, if you're going to remember anything about leadership, remember transformational leadership. It is the kind of main theory, the main approach that is most supported by research as a good, effective type of leadership. So continuing from transformational leadership, I was going to show you guys that there is this hierarchical nature of transformational leadership. Basically what it means is just from the worst types of leadership you can take to the best, which is transformational. And the worst is, I can't even pronounce this, the laissez-faire or something. It's a French word, but it means this lazy, uninvolved leader who doesn't care, doesn't really do anything. Then maybe a little bit better than that is passive management by exception, someone who stands by and watches with little to no direction. And I would say that like these two, honestly, if you ask me, if you're going to use I am going to use my example of the Avengers, these two, somewhere around these two is where Thor is. Unfortunately, I just feel like he's rarely ever even on Asgard, and when he is, it's like, what are you even doing? He's not really doing too much. The next level is active management by exception. So someone who initially gives direction, but ultimately do very little to ensure success. And as much as he's one of my favorite characters, if you've seen the Black Panther movies, that's kind of the whole conflict that T'Challa has, right? He's not really wanting to do anything, and that's where he and the villain actually fight, and he actually at the end, well, spoilers, kind of sees the villain's point of view a little bit. But those are the leaders that he might be somewhere in between these two, being very passive or active, but management by exception. They kind of don't give a lot of direction, and if they do, they ultimately do very little. The next one is maybe using reinforcement to increase desirable behavior. So that could be contingent reward. It could also be transactional. I kind of see Tony Stark falling into this category. He's a little bit selfish, at least towards the beginning. He grows. And then finally, the best type of leadership is a transformational leader, who I believe is Steve Rogers. So, that's me using my Avengers example to explain it, but you can kind of look at these and think of leaders you've had who have done these things in the past. And of course, this person is someone who could even just emerge as a transformational leader from a group, whereas this low-level leaders has to be someone like these two who are just the formal designated leaders. But of course, all of these are usually designated leaders as well. All right, so moving forward, some of the results of transformational leadership. Meta-analysis finds that transformational leadership not only is considered an effective form of leadership because it leads to these three main outcomes that we're interested in, which is the satisfaction of the leader and followers, the motivation of the leader and followers, and just ultimately the job performance of the leader and followers. Interestingly, transactional leadership, that way that looks of it as more just delegating tasks, a transaction between the leader and the follower, it also sees these positive results. So it's a type of leadership that works, but it doesn't work as well. Transformational leadership has a lot stronger positive results. So transactional is honestly probably the most common way that people tend to lead in organizations. And it works, it gets the job done, but there's a better way, and that's being a transformational leader. So some of the others I'm going to go through real quick. Authentic leadership, which is a style that is based on awareness, unbiased processing, authentic behavior, and a relational orientation. Ethical leadership, which is the demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct through personal actions and interpersonal relationships. Basically, it's just being a role model in terms of ethical behavior. And finally, servant leadership, which primarily described as a leader's ability to set aside their own needs and desires to first meet the legitimate needs and desires of his or her subordinates. So putting the followers before yourself as the leader. And if I remember correctly, these two styles of leadership, which have some research on them, are not really needed when you're using the transformational leadership because they kind of overlap. But this one has been found to have additional benefits on top of the transformational leadership. Incremental validity is the term that we use. So out of these three, they all have bodies of literature on them, and they all are good, but this is the one that is probably the best of the three and comes kind of closer to the positives of transformational. And they're not mutually exclusive, by the way. You can do them all, but if you're going to really focus on becoming a certain type of leader, I would say transformational leadership first, and then maybe servant leadership. And if you have those two, these other two would hopefully, fall into it as well. Finally, we're going to talk about that relational leadership approach. And this is, if you're going to remember one other leadership style besides transformational leadership, this is the other one because it is really big in IO right now, and it's growing a lot. So traditionally, those theories that I talked about, those traditional theories, they talk about the styles of the leadership. However, when you study them, and you do research and you conduct analyses and you look at differences in the subordinates opinions about the leader, that's considered like error, and we kind of don't really account for it when we're running analyses. Doesn't mean that the results we found are wrong, it just means that we're not accounting for all of the variances in differences between employees on their opinions. We're just kind of doing a broad rating, right? But what's wrong with doing that? Well, it's possible that subordinates are accurately reporting their experiences with their leader, even the ones that are outliers saying positive, extremely positive or extremely negative things compared to the others. That's not necessarily being inaccurate. It could be that their experience varies, right? So if that's the case, then that information could be really important. The notion here is that while leaders on average may have a typical style, the subordinates also have a style and perceive leader behavior differently from one another. And this is something that we are growing more and more interested in as we develop more complex ways of analyzing data. So this is considered, or it grew into what is considered leader-member exchange theory, which is, to be shorthanded called LMX, or LMX theory. And it proposes that not only do people have different perceptions of the leader based on their own individual difference, but also based on the fact that the leader may behave differently with different employees. So, the leader may have a style broadly, but that doesn't mean they're going to act exactly the same with every different employee. So, high quality LMX is social exchange relationship that develops over time from mutual trust and respect. Um, Usually, followers of the high quality LMX are considered members of the in-group. However, there's low quality LMX, which is an economic exchange, and their relationships at which point um, most leader-follower or relationships originate. So this is more that transactional. So follow with low quality LMX are considered outgroups, and if you have high quality LMX, you have more positive outcomes. So usually you'll go from low quality to high quality if things go well, because you all start out here, right? You can't immediately already have respect and loyalty for someone. But some people maybe never get to high quality, they stay at low quality because they're being treated differently, or because they don't like the leader style, or because there's something else going on that creates conflict between the leader and follower. Um, but if you do get to high quality LMX, you'll see reduces in turnover, increases in satisfaction, increases in commitment, increases in engagement, and increases in. So this is another theory that there's a lot more to it and it gets pretty complicated, but I just want you to broadly understand that it's trying to account for a lot more information and subtleties and differences than the other broader theories do. And there, again, you don't have to pick one or the other, right? You can be a transformational leader and still do leader-member exchange. It's more of the way that you approach examining and understanding outcomes, rather than it is, a theory style on its own. So you could have a leadership style and then also use LMX theory to analyze that leader style and its influence on the subordinates. So LMX kind of goes more into the analysis side of things rather than the inputs or the outputs, right? So it's just important to know because it is kind of we're seeing increases in research on more complex types of analyses, like I said, and this is one of the ways that this is occurring. And it's a really cool theory, and a lot of research is being done right now around this idea. So keep that in mind. There will be one more part for the leadership lecture coming up in the next video, just about leadership context, and a few things to wrap this lecture up.